Hello, my name is Brett Wade. Welcome to my yoga and meditation video site. Please note that the yoga poses, breath work, and meditation are for general interest and not meant to replace medical advice. It is always advised to make sure you are medically cleared by your family doctor or licensed healthcare practitioner prior to beginning any form of movement-based activity or breath work. When I teach yoga classes, my favorite poses are the warrior poses. And even when I do my own personal practice, I always do at least a few of the 5 warrior poses. The purpose of this video is to show you why I think everyone should consider doing at least a few of these Virabhadrasana or warrior poses every day to improve your balance, your strength, and your joint mobility so that you can become a warrior to handle the challenges that you encounter each day in your life. If this is the first time for you hearing about yoga, I can't resist providing you with a very, very brief history of yoga, some definitions, and some translations. So let's start. Just a super condensed version of the history of yoga. Here we go. Yoga is a school of wisdom which was developed by a sage named Patanjali around 500 BC. Hindu beliefs at this time were an evolution of philosophical ideas which originally came out of some of the oldest texts in the world, called the Vedas. While Patanjali was not the first to develop schools of wisdom or philosophies for understanding the true nature of reality, Patanjali's school was quite different in that it focused on meditation and breath work, and he developed 6 other pieces which he called the 8 limbs of yoga. One of those limbs is called asana, which means seat. Patanjali believed and taught that by regularly practicing meditation and concentrating on your breath work in the seated position, the seated asana, one could achieve enlightenment. There's more to it than that, but for now we'll leave it there. Over time, other philosophies would come along, and for a while, Patanjali's yoga philosophy with the 8 limbs started to fade away as busier lives had less interest in sitting around and breathing and meditating. What actually injected new life into yoga was more of a focus on movement, and of course more poses than just the sitting cross-legged pose originally developed by Patanjali. In the 17th century, a new style of yoga birthed called Hatha yoga, which involved at that time a few more poses. Eventually, Indian gymnasts would begin to add more poses into Hatha yoga, and it grew in popularity as it spread to the West in the early 1900s. Yoga eventually then spreads throughout the world as many people started to realize the benefits to both the body and the mind. In fact, the word yoga comes from a word yuj, coming out of one of the oldest texts in the Rig Veda, around 1600 BCE. The word yuj, Y-U-J, means to yoke together, to pull together the body and the mind. Okay, that's enough history. Now there are over 2,000 poses. Each of the poses, or asana, have some unique benefits to the body. For example, tree pose is an excellent pose for balance and centering yourself. Downward facing dog would be an excellent pose for stretching hamstrings and calf muscles. There are other poses which will require much more significant training and are much more difficult, and preparation needs to be brought in to be practiced by people with certainly certain injuries or ailments. Fortunately, most yoga poses can be adapted. Things like chair yoga, for example, or using props. So just about everyone can experience the health benefits of moving your body through large ranges of motion and challenging balance and strength with these asanas or poses. This video, as mentioned, is focused on 5 of the warrior poses. And in Sanskrit, in the ancient Hindu language, the warrior poses are known as Virabhadrasana. So there is Virabhadrasana 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's a very interesting mythology of why Shiva created the Virabhadra out of rage due to the death of his wife Sati. I'll leave it for you to check out that myth if you're curious. What I love about these warrior poses is that firstly, they're all standing poses. So if I don't have a mat or I don't want to get on the ground, these poses work well for that. Since they are all standing poses, they will, all of them, all 5, will challenge your balance and your strength. Because I have really stiff hips, see that video, I love the range of motion that many of the 5 warrior poses bring me into. On the note of my stiff hips, I am a middle-aged man, in case that wasn't obvious, with limited mobility in most of my joints. But I'm also an experienced yoga teacher. And you might be thinking, wait a second, how does this person who can barely tie his own shoes without grunting have the hubris or the arrogance to teach yoga? Well, let me tell you that people who arguably have the most to benefit in terms of flexibility are indeed people with, like me, limited range of motion. They want to preserve their mobility, maybe even improve it, and improve, in fact, their longevity by preventing falls and disabilities, which is one of the leading causes of death. So while the warrior poses I'm about to show you are not insta-worthy, you will still learn how to do the poses, to do them correctly, their benefits, precautions, and that my goal is that you come away from watching this video learning the amazing benefits of these 5 warrior poses, how not to injure yourself as well. I would imagine that these poses are going to look very different if you were to look on Instagram and watch somebody else do them, but we all get the same benefits from them. It is important to remember while we are holding the poses themselves that you do not hold your breath. I recommend you practice ujjayi breath, which is also known as ocean breath, while we are in the asana. If you're not familiar with ujjayi breath, I made a video short demonstration on this practice, and I'll insert a link. But in short, when you exhale, you're going to constrict the muscles slightly in your throat to make the sound of the ocean. This does 2 things. One, it slows your breath, which will help decrease your heart rate. And 2, it allows you to really notice your breath. So it becomes easier certainly to pay attention to it and to count it. This will really enhance the mindfulness of the breath work while you're in the pose or the asana. When linking together yoga poses, or even just holding as we're going to do, the transition between the poses is often timed with the breath. So it would be inhale and for the 5 Virabhadrasana poses, I will hold each of these for 5 full ocean breaths, and then I'll demonstrate the next pose. Some people, as I've mentioned, prefer to flow between the poses, and some prefer to hold, as we're going to demonstrate for those poses for 5 breaths. It tends to be my preference to hold the poses for 5 breaths or more. And I do that mainly to focus on the balance aspect, the strength aspect, and of course the mobility. But if you prefer to flow through the 5 yoga Virabhadrasana poses, you can certainly look that up. So let's get started. I'll demonstrate the warrior poses standing on a yoga mat, but of course, as mentioned, these could be done on any surface. I certainly recommend that you are at least barefoot and on a surface that doesn't allow your feet to slip very much. With any of these poses, of course, make sure that you are modifying as necessary. So if you need to use blocks or bolsters, that's just fine. No pain should ever be experienced during any practice of yoga. Virabhadrasana 1, Warrior 1. Begin standing towards the top of your mat. Take a moderate step back with your right foot to a 45-degree angle. Place your hands on your hips as you twist your hips to face them forward. As you bend your left knee, bring your arms into the air with your thumbs facing back. Now, count for 5 full ocean breaths. Count each exhalation as you make the sound of the ocean and your belly comes back in as one breath. Now come out of the pose and shake your arms and legs, and let's repeat that on the other side for 5 full breaths. Once again, begin standing towards the top of your mat. This time, take a moderate step back with your left foot to a 45-degree angle. Place your hands on your hips. As you twist your hips forward, bend your right knee, bringing your arms into the air with your thumbs facing back. Once again, count for 5 full ocean breaths, counting each exhalation as you make the sound of the ocean and your belly comes back in as one breath. Now come out of the pose, shake your arms and legs, and release all tension from your body. The benefits of Warrior 1 or Virabhadrasana 1 is that it opens up the hip through rotation, also through abduction. It's also a good range of motion pose for the shoulders and extension of the lower and middle back. Warrior 1 is also, of course, a good strength pose for the front leg. As a precaution, make sure that that front knee is staying over top of your front foot and not diving inwards. Virabhadrasana 2, Warrior 2. Begin standing in a wide-legged position, facing the long side of your mat. Turn your left foot to point towards the front or short edge of your mat. If you were to look down and draw a line from the back of your left heel, it would intersect with the arch of your back foot. Bend your front knee or your left knee over your left foot. Make sure that your kneecap is pointing down towards the middle of your foot. Your hips are still facing the long side of your mat. Bring both your arms up to a T position at 90 degrees. Make sure your shoulders aren't creeping up towards your ears. Keep your elbows, wrists, and fingers straight with palms facing down. Reach in opposite directions with your hands. Now turn your head to look over your front fingers. Engage in 5 full ocean breaths, as you gaze out over the tips of your front fingers. Now come out of that pose, shaking out your arms and legs, and let's repeat that on the other side for 5 full breaths. Once again, beginning in standing wide-legged position, facing the long side of your mat. This time turning your right foot to face the front edge of your mat, or the short edge. Once again, if you were to draw a line back this time from your right heel, it would intersect the arch of your left foot. Bend your right knee so it comes over top of the middle of your right foot. Keeping your hips facing the long side of your mat, bring both arms up to a T position at 90 degrees, making sure your shoulders aren't creeping up towards your ears. Keeping your elbows, wrists, and fingers straight, palms facing down, reaching in opposite directions. Now turn your head to look over your right front fingers. Engage in 5 full ocean breaths as you gaze over the tips of your front fingers. Now come out of the pose, shaking out your arms and legs. The benefits of Warrior 2 are that it is a good strength pose, activating the muscles of the arms and the legs. It's also a good range of motion pose for both the hips and the neck. The main precaution with this pose is to make sure you're keeping your front knee over the middle of your foot, not allowing it to dive in. Virabhadrasana 3, Warrior 3. Begin standing this time in the middle of your mat, still facing the short edge. Have your feet hip distance apart, and for now have your hands on your hips. Begin to transfer your weight to your left leg. This will be your standing leg. Bend your front knee just slightly as you step your right foot back as if it were on a cross-country ski track. Once you have your balance, begin to take more weight on the standing leg, your left leg, and then unload your back foot, allowing that right leg, straightening it out to float up into the air as you simultaneously release the hands from your hips and straighten your arms out in front of you. Find a spot on the floor or the mat in front of you and stare at that. This will help you maintain your balance. Engage in 5 full ocean breaths. Now come out of the pose and shake out your arms and your legs, and let's repeat this on the other side. Once again, Begin standing in the middle of your mat, facing the short edge. Have your feet hip distance apart, having your hands on your hips. Begin to transfer the weight this time to your right leg, bending your front knee or your right knee slightly. Step your left foot back as if it were on cross-country ski tracks. Once you have your balance, begin to take more weight on your standing leg, your right leg, and unload the back foot, bringing that left leg into the air, allowing it to float back, straightening it out as you simultaneously bring your arms straight out in front of you. Once you're there, find a spot to stare at and engage in 5 full ocean breaths. Now come out of the pose, shake out your arms and legs, and let's talk about the benefits to Warrior 3. Obviously, this is a challenging pose, a good strength and balance pose for the lower body, a good extension muscle pose for the hips and the back and shoulders. The main precaution really with this pose is that it is a significant balance challenge. Modify as necessary, perhaps not taking your back leg and floating it at all, or perhaps keeping your arms and hands on your hips. Virabhadrasana 4, Warrior 4, also known as Reverse Warrior or Proud Warrior. Begin standing in a wide-legged position, facing the long side of your mat, just as you did for Warrior 2. Turn your left foot to point to the front or short edge of your mat. Once again, if you were to draw a line back from the left heel, it would intersect with the arch of your back or right foot. Bend your front knee over your left foot, making sure again the kneecap is pointing straight down to the middle of your foot. Keep your hips facing the long side of your mat. As you begin to slide your back hand, your right hand, down your back leg, bringing your opposite arm into the air. If it's okay for your neck, begin to look up at your left hand. Engage in 5 full ocean breaths. Now come out of the pose and shake out your arms and legs, and let's repeat that on the other side. Once again, begin standing, taking a wide-legged position, as with Warrior 2, facing the long side of your mat. This time, turn your right foot to point towards the front edge or short edge of your mat. If you were to draw a line from the back of your right heel, it would intersect with your left arch. Begin to bend your right knee over top of your right foot, making sure it's in the middle of your foot. Keeping your hips facing the long side of your mat, begin to slide your back hand, your left hand, down your back leg, bringing the opposite arm and hand up into the air. Look up at your right hand. Engage in 5 full ocean breaths. Let's come out of that pose, shaking out your arms and legs. The benefits of Warrior 4 or Reversed Warrior is that it's a very good strength pose, a good range of motion pose for the legs and the arms, as well as a good side bend for the spine. The main precaution with this pose is to make sure that the front knee is bent in a position where it's over top of the foot and not diving to the inside. As always, make any modifications if you feel any discomfort in your neck or your shoulders. Virabhadrasana 5, Warrior 5, also known as Humble Warrior. Begin standing facing the short edge of your mat near the top. Have your feet hip distance apart. And as with Warrior 1, take a large step back with your right foot towards the outer edge of your mat, with your foot oriented to 45 degrees. Place your hands on your hips and adjust your pelvis so that your hips are facing forward towards the short edge of the mat. Interlace your fingers behind your back as you begin to bend your front knee, keeping it over again the middle of your foot, bending over at the waist. Allow your torso to come in towards the front knee on the inside of your bent knee as you gently bring your arms back in towards the sky. Engage in 5 full ocean breaths. Now let's come out of the pose and shake out your arms and legs, and we're going to repeat that on the other side. Once again, begin standing facing the short edge of your mat near the top, feet hip distance apart. This time taking a large step back with your left foot towards the outer edge of your mat, with your foot oriented at 45 degrees, just as with Warrior 1. Place your hands on your hips for now, and adjust your pelvis so that your hips can be facing forward. Interlace your fingers behind your back as you begin to bend your front knee, keeping it over the middle of your foot. Begin to bend forward at the waist, bringing your torso to the inside of your knee. Gently bring your arms back into the air behind you. Engage in 5 full ocean breaths. Now come out of the pose and shake out your arms and legs, and let's talk about the benefits of Warrior 5 or Humble Warrior. This is a good hip opening pose, a good strength pose, and a good range of motion pose, obviously, for the shoulders. The main precaution with this pose is that it, in fact, could put a tremendous strain on your shoulders, so make sure you're not feeling any pain or discomfort. Modify as necessary, either not bringing them as high up into the air, or perhaps just resting them in the small of your back. I hope you've enjoyed learning about warrior poses, their benefits, some precautions. If you're new to yoga, or these poses in particular, just take your time to practice them, and you'll find great benefit to strength, to mobility of your joints, and really to your balance. As I've mentioned, you will have noticed that my full expression of those Virabhadrasana poses may look rather limited and perhaps a lot less graceful compared to many of the yogis and yoginis demonstrating or teaching these poses. And I'm really okay with that. I'm still getting all the benefits from those 5 powerful poses as they are. Don't be intimidated by how a pose looks, and don't get caught up in trying to chase the perfect shape that really only is going to benefit your ego. As a physiotherapist, I can tell you I've treated a significant number of people with yoga injuries, and they got that from chasing a shape, trying to go too deeply into a pose just so they could look right on Instagram. So in my daily practice, I do 1 complete round of those 5 warrior poses I've shown you, with each of those poses again held for 5 full ocean breaths. As I mentioned, you could also flow those poses more quickly, timing each pose with 1 breath, so in and out with a breath. If you decide to flow them, I would recommend changing the order. I would recommend starting in Warrior 1, moving to Warrior 5, Humble Warrior, to Warrior 2, to Warrior 4, Reverse Warrior, and then finally perhaps ending in Warrior 3. That order just tends to make a little bit more sense as you're flowing the pose with your foot positions. Remember again to always modify. You should not feel any pain or discomfort while you're doing this. You can use blocks, you could use a chair, whatever you need to use. I hope you've liked this video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, where I not only have yoga and meditation videos, but other health documentaries, podcasts, and physiotherapy videos as well. Peacefully, Brett.